Hi everyone, it's McKenzie from SoundTraxx, and as you may know, I'm starting a beginner's video series. So today I'm going to do my first install ever on a Bachmann Spectrum EM1 with a Tsunami2 TSU-2200 decoder. This model is equipped to handle a 21-pin sound-only module. This is not compatible for a 21-pin decoder. For this installation, you'll need several different tools and supplies. The tools you'll need is a small Phillips screwdriver, wire strippers and cutters, an X-Acto knife, and tweezers. Supplies you'll need include Kapton tape, double-sided foam tape, electronics grade flux and solder, and the SoundTraxx supplies you'll need are the TSU-2200, 2 Minikube speakers is what we're doing in this install, or you can use a 28mm round speaker, which the model is set up for. You'll need 2 1K ohm resistors and some heat shrink tubing. Step number 1 is going to be to remove the tender shell. There are 4 screws holding it in place, so remove those and set the tender shell aside carefully. And then we're going to remove this motherboard, and it's got 2 screws holding it in place. We're going to unscrew those and set the motherboard to the side, but we're not going to cut these wires yet because as you can see, everything is labeled what wire goes to what, and that's going to come in handy. So we're not going to cut these wires yet. Next, we're going to install the Tsunami2 TSU-2200. First wire connections we're going to start with are the right rail pickups. There will be 2 wires from the motherboard that are going to get spliced to the red wire from the Tsunami2 decoder. We can look at our motherboard here and see they're labeled RR. We're just going to slide off the wire snoods. And the second one. Once we get our wires disconnected, we're going to start by connecting these 2 right rail pickups together. Just going to twist the ends of the wire so that they're easy to solder together. And now we are going to apply some of our electronics grade flux to the joint. Grab our soldering iron and a little bit of our solder and touch it to the end there. Now the wires are tinned together, and this will make it easy to join them to the red wire on the Tsunami2. I'm going to grab the red wire from the Tsunami2, which I've already trimmed and tinned the ends of the wires on our Tsunami2 decoder. Slide a piece of heat shrink over that joint. Add a little bit of our electronics grade flux. Grab a little bit of solder and touch my soldering iron to the joint. Now I'm going to take my heat shrink tubing, slide it over the connection, and use the barrel of my soldering iron to shrink the heat shrink. So next we're going to do the left rail pickup, and that is labeled on this corner here. It's got 2 wires as well. They're both connected on the same little tab. So we're going to pull that snood off. So again, I'm going to take these 2 wires together, twist them together. One of these leads is quite a bit longer than the other one, so I'm going to take my wire cutters and just trim that a little bit shorter. And then I'm going to add a little bit of our electronics grade flux and touch my soldering iron to and these 2 are going to go to the black wire on our decoder. I'm going to get my piece of heat shrink tubing and slide it over the black wire. And then I'm going to grab the 2 wires from the model. I'm going to add a little bit of flux and get the 2 wires from the model in line with the black wire from the decoder. And touch my soldering iron to the joint. Now I'm going to take our heat shrink, slide it over that joint, and shrink it down with the barrel of our soldering iron. Alright, now that we've got our left and right rail pickups soldered to the decoder, we're going to do the motor plus and the motor minus. I'm starting with motor plus here, and that goes to the orange wire on the decoder. So I'm going to grab the orange wire on the decoder and slide a piece of heat shrink over that. Add a little bit of flux to the end of both wires. I'll grab some solder, line these wires up, and make our connection. Slide the heat shrink over and shrink it. Now we're going to take our motor minus, and that is going to go to the gray wire on the decoder. So I'm just going to pull it out this way, keep everything nice and neat. Slide the heat shrink over it. Add some flux to both wires. And touch my soldering iron to the joint. And then we will slide our heat shrink over that wire, that connection, and shrink it. Now that we've got our right and left rail hookups and our motor hooked up, we're going to do our function common. So we're at V plus and V plus. We're going to take both of these wires and attach them to the blue wire on the decoder. So I'm going to take both of the V plus wires from the model, and I'm going to twist the ends together and tin them together so that they are easier to work with. I'm going to use flux for all of our solder connections. I've already got some heat shrink on our blue wire. I'm going to solder the V plus wires from the model to the blue wire of our decoder. Slide our heat shrink tubing over that joint and shrink it. So now we're going to be adding resistors to our headlight and backup light wire from the decoder, because the current limiting resistors are on the motherboard, so we need to add 1000 ohm resistors to our decoder. And I've got a little bit bigger pieces of heat shrink so that the resistors can fit inside of them. So I'm going to slide these on the yellow and the white wires right now. The yellow is the backup light and the white is the headlight. So I'm going to go ahead and put some flux on the wire and the resistor, and we're going to solder the resistor to the wire. And we'll do the other one. So now we're going to get the backup light off of the board, and that is going to go to our yellow wire. Add some flux. Then we're going to slide our heat shrink over the resistor and both connections and shrink it down with the barrel of our soldering iron. Now we're going to grab our headlight, which is the last wire attached to our motherboard here. So we can set that aside, and we are going to attach it to the other end of the resistor on our white headlight wire. Then we're going to go ahead and slide our heat shrink over and shrink it down. So now we're going to do our speaker wires. So I trimmed them a little bit shorter, strip the ends, and I'm going to tin them with a little bit of flux and a little bit of solder. We've already mounted the mini cubes in the model, and I'm going to take the positive speaker wire, which you can tell from the wiring diagram is the one on the outside edge of the decoder with the tinned in, and I'm going to solder it to the post here on this mini cube speaker. I'm going to add a little bit of flux to the end of the wire and to line it up with the post. Grab my soldering iron Alright, so now I'm going to take the negative speaker wire and I'm going to tin the end of it as well. Since we're using 2 mini cube speakers for this install, we're wiring them in series. As you can see, we put the positive lead here and we have a jumper in between these 2 speakers, and now we're going to take our tinned negative lead, put some solder on it, and we're going to solder it to this post on this second mini cube. Alright, so that's all of the loose wires we have on the decoder and the model. So you'll notice that the only wires we have left are these few lighting outputs that we're not using in this model. So we've trimmed them short, insulated the ends, and taped them back so that they can't cause any shorts or anything like that. And we have found a match for every wire on the decoder to every wire on the model. So now we just need to button up this installation. Alright, now we've got our install all wrapped up in this Bachmann Spectrum EM1. We tested it out before we put everything together just to make sure it was running and everything's working correctly. So let's see it in action. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching, and as always, follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter at SoundTraxx.com.